They say communists want to come in and take your stuff, take your family, make you gay, abolish your religion, all this stuff. They want to basically destroy your way of life. The left-wingers, the communists, say, we do want to do that. There's nothing you can do.
Welcome to a new episode of Overlap brought to you by Wave Media. I'm Chris, and this is today's guest, Grayson, hailing from the United States. Grayson is a law student and currently doing this exchange at Shanghai Jiao Tong University. I find him to be an extremely interesting guy because the thing he told me that there's this movement that he helped to build in the United States. It's got MAGA Communism. And MAGA Communism, when you think of the two words, MAGA, Make America Great Again, and communism, these are two polar opposites if you think about a political spectrum. Because communism, if you look at it, it's almost always placed at the extreme left side, whereas MAGA, you think about conservatism, you think about probably white supremacy, racist, all those kind of negative things that's depicted by the mainstream media.
Yeah.
Are you reconciling these two polar positions, or are you trying to juxtapose them together to create something new?
I would say that for us, MAGA communism, we're very aware of the apparent contradiction. Because according to the mainstream media, and of course even the predominant left in the US, MAGA is this kind of ideologically defined right-wing movement that is the polar opposite of communism, like you said. And then communists, on the other hand, supposedly stand for the exact opposite principles as MAGA. But to us, this contradiction, this apparent contradiction, is only apparent. And MAGA communism for us is just Marxism-Leninism that is applied to the American context. And it's nothing more than that. The reason why we use this very provocative term, and it's on purpose, is to basically draw a line between what we view as a kind of authentic and independent working class movement in the US and the fake or synthetic left that objectively ends up just aiding the ends of the government, of the US government, which wants to expand it at the expense of the working people and even at the expense of the people of the world. Because for us, if we're Marxists, we don't look at things ideologically. Ideology always reflects a real material basis that people are coming from. We don't take them at their word when they say we are anti-communists, we support capitalism, democracy, whatever. You always have to read between the lines. What are they really saying when they say that we hate the communists? They're saying that they oppose Bill Gates, they oppose Soros, they oppose these kind of international bankers. When they say we oppose the globalists, they are talking about the same financial cabal that communists ought to be historically.
But these lines are usually oversimplified and vilified by the media. These are really dangerous lines. If you mentioned that in the US, the international cabal, as George Soros, well, it sort of reminds probably the US media will say, "Well, this is a conspiracy theory, anti-Semitic," or criticism like that will come at you.
Sure, I mean, it's inevitable, but all communist movements have been decried as antisocial, as whatever. They've always been smeared in this way. They're scared of this word communism. But the duty of communists is to go down to where the working class is and to win them over. It's not to pander to any kind of reactionary views that they might hold, that are influence of the petty bourgeois or other classes. But it's to still stand by them and to clarify their aims. And that's the point of communists, right? Formulate a working class party that's independent of both the Republican and Democratic establishment.
Okay. I think I watched one of those interesting encounters between Has and MAGA Trump supporters.
Yeah.
They hold a rally and he approached the people and asked them questions. Why are you supporting Trump? Should Bill Gates return the land to American people? And they say, yes. And in a way, it's kind of bringing communist position, sort of communist position to the people. It's practicing the mass line in the States and asking these people could be not familiar with the ideology of communism, but in fact what they support is to return power to the American people.
Yeah, and I think our position, it's no different. I'm going to emphasize, it's no different than the position of every Marxist-Leninist party in history, from the Chinese Communist Party to the Bolsheviks. Our position is this: it's that the duty of
CPUSA?
Of the ideally the CPUSA. That's a different story.
Okay.
But the position of communists is basically to clarify that what working people want, what they're striving for, it's not ideological, right? They want to put food on the table. They want to send their kids to college. They want to just make a living. They want to exist, okay? And then sometimes this is expressed ideologically. We want to return to a republic of, by, and for the people. We want to take out corruption. We want Bill Gates to return the land, right? That's what you said. Our point, and the point of communists, is to always show that the aims of the working class can only be achieved through communism. Okay. You want a popular republic, you want Bill Gates to return the land or whatever, right. You have to violate the sacrosanct right of property, which, as Marx observes, comes at the expense of the vast majority. The private property as an institution really means the dispossession of property for the vast majority. And ironically, it's the supersession of private property in China, for instance, that has allowed for a new degree of ownership amongst normal people. I mean, home ownership in China, vastly ahead of the United States. And this is, of course, unintelligible for those who just view communists and private property as annihilating everything. It's not. So I would say that, our message to these people is we're going to stick by them. We're going to be down in the trenches with them side by side. But we're always going to be clarifying the class nature of these conflicts, without pandering to any other sentiments that might get in the way.
Right, sorry. So essentially you are making clear distinction between political rhetorics about left and right versus the kind of economic base, the people who owns the means of production. Whoever wants to, I think, whoever opposes this political arrangement, this global political arrangement, depending on what kind of ideological weapon they take up, could be considered revolutionary. They are not the kind of reactionary that people like to label them. You racist. You do this. You oppose this because you're racist. You are a bigot. You are this and that. All kinds of bad words. But essentially, they are fighting against this system that they deem to be unjust and unfair, unequal. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think that, before I answer the question more directly, something like a motivation behind MAGA communism, it's not just to win over the MAGA working class, which is the only independent working class movement in the US for a very long time. And that's what's attractive about it to us. Another aim of this is basically to shatter the fake left, which employs Marxist phraseology as a sense of basically moral superiority. I mean, you can think of like maybe a Thanksgiving dinner. It's not good to talk politics at Thanksgiving, okay? But imagine someone who's very left-wing, a college student, whatever, it's very typical. They are basically hiding their class hatred towards working class people, your Uncle Jerry, whatever, who's a mechanic. In this like moral superiority of like Marxism or wokeness or whatever else you'd like. Now imagine if Uncle Jerry starts speaking the language of Marxism, but his class basis is the same. He's still the same, rough and tumble, working class guy, a redneck or whatever. You destroy the justification that these students have for identifying with Marxism, and you establish Marxism as a working class movement, as something to clarify the working class's aims. So this relates to this left and right. For us, it's not just about what people say that they are, and not just about the ideological surface level stuff. It's what do they actually mean? And when you say about like progress and reaction, left and right, it's definitely true. I mean, the establishment before, even the 1950s maybe, it's conservative, more or less. And in a more dialectical way, even the liberal establishment today is conservative. I mean, but we obviously look like we're flipping things. It looks like we are identifying the right as the left and the left as the right. In reality, what we're doing is just asserting a very basic materialist axiom, which is that appearance and essence are two different things. What something appears to be is not what it is essentially. And it's not like the left is defined by this trans-historical checklist of
Okay.
Do you support LGBT
okay,
rights? Do you
okay.
support open borders,
Yeah, yeah,
etc.?
Yeah.
It's not about that. I mean, this is
Okay.
an idealistic way of thinking. It's also
So
very
this is not
silly.
about that. So
No.
you're totally not interested in fighting a culture war.
The culture war does have some interest for us because it reflects a real, in our view, it does reflect the class struggle in some instances.
Right.
This kind of nihilistic culture that's pushed on the American people from above by institutions. Yes, working people do express their organic dislike of this in various ways, sometimes in reactionary ways.
Okay.
The duty of communists is to redirect this in a way that is scientific, that's clear, that still leads them to victory, essentially. I wouldn't say that we are flipping left and right. I would say that we're just clarifying what left and right really mean in America. And this is controversial, I know, but the American left in the US, I'm of course generalizing, but the predominant voices, Bernie Sanders and so on, this is objectively a right wing. It's a left wing of capital, if you want to use this old Marxist phraseology, but it's still a right wing.
Okay.
I mean, Sanders, for example, does not support a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. I mean, these are supposedly the preeminent voices of the American left.
Okay.
But MAGA, on the other hand, they want to dissolve the FBI, the CIA, they don't want foreign wars. I'm supposed to believe that they're right wing because they don't use pronouns? I mean, it's a very silly dichotomy that you're left wing by basically virtue signaling to what the media says is left wing talking points.
Wow, interesting. I mean, I'm more interested in your positions, like in U.S. politics, like on a lot of issues like identity politics, environmental protection, all kinds of things. What are your positions? You support or against?
It depends. I mean, for a lot of these environmental protections, we don't deny that we live in an ecological age. Right. And it's just basic common sense. When the world itself is so integrated and global, you're going to have some kind of, you need to take care of the stuff you're cultivating, okay? But the way that you do this is an open question. And we do think that a lot of the predominant environmentalism in the US and in the West, I wouldn't say as much in China, which is a different issue. It's very anti-human. And it's a degrowth ideology that does not want, for example, to see the development of the productive forces. To be just very basic, we support geoengineering.
Okay.
We support maybe technological solutions. We don't want to roll back the wheel. We don't want to roll back the wheel to some, you know, potato farming life where we don't use GMOs or whatever.
Right.
Now, some of this stuff, I think, is a given. Maybe, for example, even with GMOs, maybe we should revisit the efficacy and the utility of this. Small plots, maybe these are good. But environmentalism, as such, is often used as a tool for the monopolists to inhibit the development of the productive forces of another country. We don't want to see the third world develop sovereignty, economic sovereignty, to drill oil, for instance. We want them to rely on the West's technological superiority, their kind of their ability to put forward environmentalist solutions to global problems. So I think
the big farm companies.
Yeah, Monsanto and so on. Yeah, I mean a lot of these monopolists, they are actually supporting green energy solutions in a way that, you know, maybe should make leftists suspicious about where they cast their support. Right. But yeah, I would say that it just depends on the issue. Our ultimate aim, again, for MAGA communism is the same as any Marxist party: formulate the proletariat into a class and challenge the status quo. Right. To have an independent working class movement, both independent of the Republican and Democratic establishment. How this movement expresses itself is a different matter, but Marxist's duty is to clarify it, to give it clarity, to give it the weapons it needs to succeed.
There's a burning question I want to ask. Black Lives Matter or All Lives Matter?
I think Black Lives Matter had a real significance for I think it's opportunistic to use this All Lives Matter language. Okay. It's very clear that Black America suffers in a way that...
the question, okay, let me rephrase it.
Yeah.
What do you think of the critical theory of race?
Of race. Yeah. Well, I do think it does relate to BLM, actually. Just to go back to this original question. Yeah. BLM did start as a kind of organic movement against police brutality. Yes. But look how it has ended up. It was co-opted by the Democratic Party. And it was essentially used as a weapon to silence a lot of different voices, even in the Black community, who were critical of the aims of BLM. Okay. And I think institutionally, all it did, much like the environmental movement, it just strengthened the NGOs and the institutions and the media of the democratic establishment. I mean, the Republican Party is still an establishment, of course. We're not denying this. It's not like we are jumping with the Republicans to avoid the Democrats.
Okay.
But it's very clear that the Democratic Party is much closer to defining what the deep state is in the US. The media, it's undeniably has a quote-unquote left-wing bias, a liberal bias, we should say. Institutions, the universities, these ultimately serve a kind of quote-unquote leftist bias. It's, of course, a fake left, but it's a leftist bias. And we think that it's dangerous for radicals to fall under the illusion that their support for these things is necessarily radical. I mean, look, if you're getting your radical politics from the university, which is funded by the state, and then you're voicing it in terms of like the same terms that NGOs, maybe you work for an NGO, like you're not a radical. You're not independent of this establishment when you're working with them.
Okay.
It should be very clear that the aim of communists is first and foremost to be independent of the language and the institutions of both. And just again, to relate it to MAGA, that's what was attractive about MAGA to us. It is discursively independent. And that's why they're considered right-wing, I think rather unfairly. They're just right-wing, not because they're racist. Really, if you talk to MAGA people, by and large, they're not racist. I mean, they are just everyday people. But they're considered right-wing because they don't kowtow to the liberal establishment. They don't speak the language, which is, by the way, filtered through the universities and this pseudo-leftist...
Teach you the grammar of that rhetoric.
Exactly. It's a grammar. It's a rhetoric, but it's nothing more. It's all performative.
Okay.
And that's why we've even gotten into some trouble. People have accused us of being basically pandering, but we're not. We're not even looking to be tailist, to basically tail the sentiments of the reactionary elements of the working class. We're just looking to have some kind of relation with it, to establish some connection between high theoretical Marxism, which is this, of course, ambitious German philosophy, English political economy, and French socialism, right, as Lenin said. We're uniting this with the actually existing American working class, which has all sorts of different views about different things. I mean, MAGA is not ideologically defined. And that's the most important thing that I think your audience should grasp if they don't already. There is no MAGA ideology. It's a hodgepodge. You have libertarians, you have nationalists, you do have some racists probably. You have left-wingers, you have right-wingers, you have Tea Partiers, you have all sorts of people. What unites them is an objective split between the people and the status quo, much like Occupy Wall Street, which I think you can situate MAGA in continuity with. It's the same populistic elements that we're looking to establish communion with. And a left wing that spits on this and denigrates it for not having the proper grammar or the proper rhetoric is not a left wing at all. They are pro-establishment. And I don't want to hang on this question too much. I know you have many more wonderful questions, but an interesting thing to point out, when the trucker strike was undergoing in Canada, and there was a threat of one in the US too, what was the response of the American left, the voices of the American left? The streamers, the politicians, they condemned it as fascist. Why? Because it was predominantly, but not all even, white, straight, cisgender, heteronormative men, many of whom were flying MAGA flags. What Marxist looks at things from this ideological surface level appearance and says, because you don't speak my language, which I got from the university, you are the class enemy. You are objectively a reactionary. And that's why we flip left and right. The left is objectively reactionaries when they side against the independent working class movements in the US and in Canada. I mean, predominantly this trucker strike happened in Canada. In the US, Biden banned the rail strike. I mean,
Well, it certainly reminds me of this term, socialism with a human face. And today it's capitalism with the human face. And the left in the United States is giving that human face to capitalism.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny.
I think that's a good way to put it. It's like, it's a PR, because I think, I don't want to get too much into theoretical stuff, but we do live in a very different capitalism, if you can call it that, than what we lived in the 1900s, in Marx's day even. It's a very different system. And I think there's a reason why the ruling elites today, where it's much more centralized and much more globalized, which is planned. I mean, the economy, the way these companies, large companies exert themselves, is largely it's more planned than even the USSR in some respects. It's not free market competition.
Okay.
There's a reason why they're comfortable with this left-wing language. It doesn't challenge them.
Okay.
It actually helps to support their aims.
Okay.
That's again, to go back to your green question, that's why we are not automatically viewing ecological politics as left-wing.
Okay.
It's integrated within their scheme of monopolization and degrowth.
Because there's this element of greenwashing, there's this element of woke. You know, being woke sometimes helps you to grow your business. It helps. So it's just to have that progressive facade makes it more less prone to criticism. Because you mentioned that ideology and materialism are, you know, two different things. And I want to go back to a time that was the latter half of the 20th century, where there was basically two ideological camps in the world fighting Cold War with each other. The U.S., is the so-called free world, liberal democracies, versus the Soviet Union, communist bloc. And the end of the Cold War resulted in one of the system a triumph over the other. And essentially, it's this ideology that market is the solution to everything. There was little regard to civilizational or historical experiences of different people. So every nation, you want to convert them to this liberal democracy, even though, if, for example, in the Middle East, the wars in the Middle East, you want them to change the regime to be more like you, basically.
Yeah.
And that was futile. It proved to be futile, I think.
Yeah, it's collapsing today.
And I think, in a way, it hurts the American people. Because on a surface level, yes, America grew a lot. And any country who aligned with America, for example, China basically allied with the U.S. to you know, after Kissinger visited Beijing.
He saved global communism.
Basically, the new liberal camp wind, and they basically had tremendous growth, but all the growth didn't trickle down, as there was no trickle down economics. All this tremendous wealth were concentrated in the hands of the very, very few. Production could happen in many countries simultaneously, but the capitalists want the production to happen in country where the resources are cheap. The human laborers are cheap, so everything is cheap and more effective. So essentially, capital and goods, they can move across borders, but people cannot. So you have those who are lagging behind in, for example, the Rust Belt, and the blue-collar workers in the States who suddenly find their income were stagnating throughout the years for decades, or even they receive less of what they had in the 70s. Essentially, it's the capitalists, they can move freely across borders, so that they can be brutally effective in exploiting resources, whereas common people, they were left out, they were left behind. And so I think that's what created the MAGA, the demand for the change in the status quo, and that's a very legitimate demand, I think, from the people.
MAGA is a product of deep economic changes in the US that left it deindustrialized and predominantly dominated by a service economy to make up for this big glut. I do agree with you that MAGA is a large result of the financialization and deindustrialization, taking away industries from the US. And they've been left with no political alternative, but, well, it ended up being Trump, right? At first, this working class was wedded to the Democratic Party as a result of the New Deal. The Democrats kind of had a social contract with the unionized working class, which of course was annihilated under Reagan. War against the unions and so on, and deindustrialization destroyed this kind of social contract. But the left, a big indication of how weak the left is and communism was in America, I should say is in America, is the fact that this working class wasn't left with a left that could express its interests. They just ended up pandering to, you know, Reagan, later to maybe the patriotism of Bush, elements at least did, and to Trump. The difference is that Trump was a political outsider. And we talked about this some before. He's a clown. I mean, it's objectively hilarious that he won the US election. Nobody expected it. But by being a clown and by basically showing the whole thing as a farce, as a comedy, you know, US politics, he was able to relate to everyday people in a way that other politicians couldn't. He wasn't speaking the language. He wasn't in the discourse. He was an outsider. And that's why he ended up winning over this, what became MAGA, which I should stress is not synonymous with Trump. I mean, we don't view Trump and MAGA as the same thing at all. I mean, MAGA booed Trump when he was talking about COVID.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
I would say that, to go back to your question ultimately, yeah, MAGA is a result of this deindustrialization.
So basically, most Americans, most MAGA folks, they are in a very disadvantaged position. So So and that they are in that disadvantaged position because America, as basically ever since the end of the Cold War, America has taken its system to the world and established its global presence of this empire and exporting its economic system to everywhere in Europe and even China in a sense. So everywhere is producing something for the American empire. You know, so in that process, the United States itself is becoming, if you want to use the Roman analogy, it's not like the Republic of Rome, but rather a province. It's a province in the empire itself. So people were like citizens of the Republic, but at face value. But in fact, they are not recognized by their institution. They are not recognized by their system. And I think that America got into this position because America has too much burden.
Too much of a burden.
Too much burden.
Yeah.
If you look at Donald Trump said, America first. America first essentially is an isolationist position. Because America had too much burden to care for its alliance system and overseas. Europe, those countries essentially outsourcing their defense to America. So you have to put in resources to NATO. You have to have this military-industrial complex that producing unproductive, destructive goods.
Yeah.
to the world, and they cost a lot. So America is in a very disadvantaged position if you're an ordinary American citizen, but America has made tremendous benefit if you are at the top. So essentially, the weight of, if you look at Germany, if you look at France, their defense budget, they don't have
We take care of it.
Yeah, we take care of it. So look at South Korea, or its allies. America has to take care of all its allies. And essentially China, Donald Trump used to call China a free rider. Well, in a way, yes, because there was this Leviathan. There must be this Leviathan in a Hobbesian sense. Yeah. So nobody fights anymore. So you have to be that 800-pound gorilla. You have to be there, and you have to have the military might to make that case that you are the hegemon of the world. And you have to put resources to substantiate that credible threat.
And a lot, I mean, the global economy rests upon this threat, right? I mean, the US dollar is reserve currency.
And that weight of the weight of the free riders are crushing down on the shoulders of the lesser people.
Yeah, look, this is a good, again, way to bring us to MAGA communism and the significance. Because MAGA outflanked the left for the most part on this question exactly. MAGA is against the war, the American continual funding of the war in Ukraine. MAGA, by and large, I mean, they are split for various ideological reasons, but MAGA people are by and large hostile to the idea of just giving Israel a free ride to massacre Gazans. Because they don't, maybe not for moralistic reasons, but for common sense reasons. Why are you taking my money to go bomb people in the Middle East?
It's irrelevant.
My school is a shit show, right? My roads are unpaved. All of these things matter to people.
Yes.
And MAGA expresses these things in the language that it's capable of,
Yes.
which organically is not inevitably left-wing. It's the duty of communists to go down to the people and give them a correct language, to intercommune with them, to listen to them and learn from them, and give them a communistic understanding.
But, you know, I think one of the central notion that I think we should address is nation or state. Essentially, you're coming from an internationalist position.
Yeah.
But then these MAGA people, they are advocate for isolationist stance that we only focus on America first, and MAGA people, the patriots. Are you internationalist, nationalist, statist? How do you make a distinction between the so-called globalist empire versus the internationalist, the future you're looking toward?
Oh, I see. Our view on internationalism and the nation is that you can only have an internationalist position and you can only have a class struggle by discovering what that means in your own national context.
Okay.
Because socialism is nothing more than bringing society to the fore of production. We're producing in a socially oriented way. But society is not an abstraction. Okay? Society in China is historically defined. Society in America is historically defined. These are indexed by a real history of real people. It's rooted in how people make their living and their way of life. It's concrete. It's not a philosophical abstraction. It's a real thing. And the class struggle proceeds from this basis. This is why Stalin, for instance, not only goes into the national question in one of his works, but he says with Socialism in One Country, that socialism is socialist in content and national in form. And that this is the essence of socialist patriotism, which China practices, which we put it into practice in our own way, in our own community, and what we are trying to revive, the spirit of socialist patriotism. It doesn't mean supporting the flag or the institutions of America against authentic interest of the third world or whatever. If Vietnam wants to burn the American flag, they have a reason for this. Although they don't, by the way. They're allied with the US empire. I won't get into it, but you can see how Vietnam is related to this. Socialist patriotism does mean that we proceed from a love of the people, a love of the country that we come from. People are surprised by this. You know, Lenin, I pointed this out in the video, Lenin, people often cascade Lenin as an anti-Russian guy. He doesn't like Russians. He's kind of, some people even say he's a foreigner himself, right? German agent. But you know what Lenin said? He said that we don't hate our country. We love our language and we love our country. And we're doing the utmost to raise its toiling masses, 9/10 of its population, to democratic and to socialist consciousness. In other words, communists don't proceed from an anti-national standpoint. They proceed from a position of love of their people. When Mao was fighting on behalf of the Chinese people, he wasn't fighting on behalf of an abstract working class. He was fighting on behalf of the Chinese people. And it's through that deep nationalism, if you want to call it nationalism, because this is a colloquial way of saying it, I guess. It's through this nationalism that you arrive at an internationalist position, right? It's through the love of your country that you're able to situate it in the community of other countries. You can see the imprint that America makes on the wide tapestry of world history. And that's something that socialists should be proud of. And they should be against the globalists, use MAGA's language.
No love for the country, no
Who don't
love for
have
the
a
nation.
Yeah, their patriotism is like George Bush's patriotism. It's like, what is patriotic about waving the flag and sending our boys to die in Iraq? There's nothing patriotic about it. So I think that socialist patriotism, that's another dividing line that we basically drew in the US, because to be a leftist in America a lot of the times corresponds with a very anti-social position.
In a way, I think the MAGA or anything you want to be politically successful, politically significant, you have to build a united front that makes clear but nuanced distinction between who you want to unify with and who you want to target against. And I think that's a really demanding job.
It is, but that's exactly our strategy. It's create a popular front with other elements. And we've been successful in this, I think. If you look at Jackson Hinkle, for instance, he's been able to basically ally himself with a lot of disparate elements who are part of an anti-establishment. You can say it overlaps with MAGA. It's not always the same thing,
Okay.
but the anti-establishment camp. And that's the way we orient ourselves. We are on cordial relations, I would say, with a lot of libertarian elements, with the LaRouche people. We have disagreements with these types. Of course we do. We're not ideologically the same. We're proceeding from Marxism. But we're able to build this popular front because it's our view that if communists forge an alliance, first if they get their shit together and they have a strong party, an independent party, they forge an alliance with these other anti-establishment elements, and then they prove in practice, in deeds, that they're the most capable fighters of the working class, then it will naturally be the case that communists win a good name in America. Because Americans, I think people who are in America, they get this. If your audience isn't, then take my word for it, because I'm from the South. So I'm around these people quite a lot. Americans are not ideological. I mean, students are, like leftists are.
But we're Chinese.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's why we have some common bond between us. I mean, pragmatism came from America, and I think it's found a home in China too. John Dewey and so on. But Americans are not ideologists. The ideological ones are, of course, it's a very small minority. Americans, their attitude for communism will be like, if that's what a communist is, then call me a communist. The problem is this, look, it's kind of funny. You could express it as a meme if you want. Imagine the meme, it will be a brilliant meme. Right-wingers say that communism, the right-wing grifters, they say communists want to come in and take your stuff, take your family, make you gay, abolish your religion, all this stuff. They want to basically destroy your way of life. The left-wingers, the communists, say, we do want to do that. There's nothing you can do. And then there's a kind of right and left-wing alliance and consensus about what communism means. And it's totally alien to what communism ever was historically, even from an intuitive level. And it's, of course, working-class people, when they see all this, they're going to identify communism as the establishment, because that's what the establishment does. They are assaulting, in many ways, religious liberties of people. They are destroying free speech rights. They are taking people's stuff. You will own nothing and be happy. Of course, they identify this as the communists. The communists are speaking this language. So the duty of Marxist-Leninists in the U.S. is to show in practice what it means to be an American communist. Not just to explain it away, kind of like I'm doing here, but to show in practice what it means to be a partisan of the American people. And this is a process that will take years. I mean, no one denies that this is the beginning of something that at least has not been tried before in American politics. But we're confident that if we put in the elbow grease and if we try at least, there's no way that we can lose. There's no way we can lose any more than the left has already. I think we have a lot of disagreements with other people in the anti-establishment camp, of course. But these disagreements are, for the most part, surface level, because we don't take ideology as definitive. What's important is not whether someone calls himself a nationalist, even a socialist, a communist, whatever. What relation do they actually have to the American political establishment? If you're a liberal and you are anti-establishment, like Jimmy Dore, you are an ally. We are going to naturally ally with these people. Even if someone is woke, right? But they are somehow against the predominance of, in some aspects, maybe the institutions of the American state, we'll of course we're not going to divide and not make friendships with these people. I think that our strategy has been largely successful. It's why MAGA communism was trending, this apparent contradiction was trending so long on Twitter, and why it's prompted a flurry of responses by people supporting and people denigrating us. So again, I think the success speaks for itself.
I think you're in a similar situation where Mao was when he had to unite most people, make friends with, and it was the de facto Chinese foreign policy even after the establishment of the People's Republic of China, to make friends with more people, the more the merrier.
Just to summarize everything, people don't care who you are and what you do in your free time. They just want to be left alone to their own devices. And what they don't like is the intrusiveness of this ideology. It's not the fact that people identify as transgender or whatever that bothers them. What bothers them is that it is constantly, seems to be artificially pushed on them. and at the expense of their actually existing problems. Whether it be wages, whether it be destruction of their own free time, they're overworked, they're underpaid, they have no prospect for the future. They see the things they're familiar with in their culture and their way of life disintegrating before them, and they see that the media is basically laughing at this, calling them deplorables, calling them terrorists, calling them all sorts of things. And they naturally feel some revulsion to this, and this of course gets opportunistically taken advantage of by the right. I mean, the right, DeSantis and so on, they're demagogues. They play up on this fear of the left wants to turn your kids gay. All this kind of BS culture war stuff, it's the same project as the liberal establishment. They're in cahoots together because it keeps people distracted and fighting over the scraps. And our position is we are against this artificial imposed culture, but we are not pandering to the right. We're not pandering to the opportunists like DeSantis, who want to, for an example, decry the cultural degeneracy, which is very real in America. It's very real, this degeneration and this moral decay. But the right supporting economic policies that create that moral decay. They're, with one hand, saying, it's so horrible. We've lost the family, we've lost religion. But with the other hand, you are undermining the family. You are undermining religion. With your focus on neoliberal economic policies, with deindustrialization, and you're promising people a false hope that keeps them constantly in the state of anger and divisiveness against other people who might be in their family. I mean, everyone has, I don't like this term all the time, woke family members. This should not be something that divides people, you know? It should be something that Americans, again, have a national tradition that communists should express of let it be. You are what you want to be. And we're not going to bother you one way or another. I have my small plot of land, kind of the human farmer stereotype. Just let me be. Don't involve yourself and stick your nose where it doesn't belong.
This is the time of great change, that the hegemonic order is in retreat. Its weakness is ever more evident since the financial crisis of 2008, and also the elections, the political chaos in America, and not only in America, but in a number of Western countries, especially in the Anglosphere. So I think that the chaos is there. So the great change is upon us. I was about to ask, what do you think of multipolarity?
We think multipolarity is not simply something to be supported or rejected. It's just a reality that is unfolding, whether people like it or not. And I think our view is that a multipolar system is not only the natural way of the world. I mean, that is how the world has historically always worked. Before the unipolar moment, beginning with Britain. I wouldn't even say with Spain, but with Britain. And I think the American people have an interest in, without denigrating ourselves, of course, becoming a normal country. And what that means is, like you said, the weight of being the world policeman doesn't benefit us. It doesn't even get us good clout or prestige. It makes the world despise us, not appreciate us for the contributions that American people have made for humanity. Instead, they can remember the bombs and the missiles and the tanks and their support for Israeli occupation forces. I think that American communists have a duty to not decry America as a project, but to emphasize its roots as, to some extent, an anti-colonial power. I mean, the whole point of the Monroe Doctrine, which was, of course, used to exert American imperial interests under Teddy Roosevelt, was devised to keep the European colonialists out. The aim of the other founders was never for this spiderweb network of NGOs and political ties with other countries and getting involved with the elections of other countries, overthrowing them. It was an economic cooperation that we will build a new Jerusalem here in America. Because this is a land of frontiersmanship and land of opportunity. We will develop, and people want to come, they will come. And, you know, as a melting pot, which by the way, again, some dividing line between maybe nationalists. We are a melting pot. America is a melting pot. It's always been a melting pot. We have a definitive nation that they're melting into. But you can't impose a form, whether of whiteness or whatever. or of LGBT identity, which I think they're doing now. This is the new kind of form of a priori imposition. You can't impose this on people. You have to let culture breathe and become what it needs to be. And I think America's interest is to join as another normal nation with the other countries of the world. As a preeminent one, we are a major nation. We are, I think, maybe it's wrong to say, but I think we're also a civilization state of some sort. And I think that we should get along with Russia, China, and the other countries of the world. We want to basically be there as reliable allies of the American working class, which will be looking in all sorts of different directions for an answer. Trump is not their messiah. Trump is an important figurehead, and as a meme even, a very popular one, right? Even internationally, people. But Trump is not going to lead them to the promised land. And no right-wing grifter is going to. And no left-winger is going to even be able to reach out to them because they call them fascists. So we want to build a discourse that is capable of reaching out to them and supporting them and giving them a clear vision and direction to build a working class party that can be an alternative to the two-party duopoly that dominates American cultural, political, and social life. Maybe that's a good way to end.
Yes, that's a good dose of revolutionary optimism.
Of course, you have to be an optimist.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.